I thought we would just go down the panel and everybody will introduce themselves, and maybe as they do that, you'll think of some questions that you might have to ask them. So why don't we start? I'll wrap it up after we pass it down. So Robert, go ahead.
Oh, yeah, I got my own mic.
Yay.
Hello, everybody. Is this working?
Yes.
Okay. So my name's Robert Grillo, and I'm the founder and director of Free From Harm, which is a nonprofit animal advocacy organization. And I'm the author of the book Farm to Fable, which is an exploration of the fictions that our culture perpetuates about animal consumption, and taking a closer look at that. Thank you. You got your.
Oh,
you got
I do. Hey.
Hold it close.
Hello, my name is Samantha Annilyn, and I am the founder of a vegan, cruelty-free, ethical, and eco-friendly clothing line called Audrey Unchained. We are here exhibiting today. That's pretty much it. Yeah, everything we do is made for impact for animals, for people, and for planet, but particularly for animals is why we started the whole business.
Hello, we are John and Brenda Vetter, and we are the founders and directors of Criations Farm Sanctuary. We're a small family-run farm sanctuary up in Endeavor, which is about an hour north of here. And we're dedicated to rescuing and helping farmed animals.
Great, thank you all for that. My name's Ellen Jaffe Jones, and I am the author of the books you see at the bottom, Eat Vegan on $4 a Day, Kitchen Divided, which I think is still out there, and Paleo Vegan, and Vegan Fitness for Mortals, and then this just came out this week. I'm just going to hold it up a little bit, Vegan Sex. It's only on Kindle. It's only been on for 3 days, and it has an Amazon ranking of 1,000, and my Amazon author ranking went up to 70 of all authors on Amazon this morning. So vegan myth busting is basically what I do. Why? Because my mom and both sisters had breast cancer, and my aunt died of it in our home when I was 5. So that kind of sent me on a trajectory to listen to the doctors who said you better do something different with your life or you're going to end up like everybody else in your family. And they all had heart disease and diabetes. We were part of the original breast cancer gene studies, although we didn't need a study to tell us what we already knew, that the gene was alive and well in our family, although 2 of the cases are not genetically caused. I became a television investigative reporter. I worked in Miami and St. Louis for 18 years. Then I went to, when they told me 40's never too young to have a facelift, and I refused to do that, I went to Smith Barney as a financial consultant and focused on socially responsible investing. And then after doing that for 5 years, decided to do media training and called up Neil Barnard and said, do you guys need any media training? And he said, why, as a matter of fact, we do. And so they hired me for a couple years. I made several trips to Washington to train a lot of their staff and doctors who have come through their doors over the years. So that sort of planted the seed for writing my first book and trying to figure out, how can I add to this movement? And I challenge you all to do the same, because I know that you wouldn't be here unless you're passionate and have some idea that is fermenting in your head and your heart, and maybe you can ask us questions that can help you achieve whatever goals you have. I'm figuring that you stayed around because you have some kind of burning desire, burning question that's there, so feel free to throw it out. But while you're thinking about that, I will just throw a question to the panel. What has been your biggest obstacle, and how have you overcome it in trying to do what it is you do? I know, especially Farm Sanctuary, I think of that is like God's work. So why don't we just go down the panel, Robert, if you want to start?
Sure. Well, in terms of obstacles, I would say, I think our culture is a huge obstacle in terms of the work that I do, and looking for ways to kind of have people look at culture and what they've learned from culture about food and the choices they make, and about how they perceive the animals that they consume, to look more critically at that, to actually question it. So that's the biggest obstacle. I wouldn't even call it it's a challenge and it's an obstacle. It depends on who you're talking to. Sometimes it's a huge obstacle, and other times it's you're dealing with someone who's more receptive. So yeah, I would say that's probably the big one.
Okay. For me, I think it came down to product development. We have no idea, we don't realize how many non-vegan things go into clothing. We all know the big things, how leather is made, how wool is made, where our fur skins come from, but there's so many tiny little things that we don't even think about on a day-to-day basis that affect animals. And not even directly, but indirectly, like through the environment, about taking land away from them or taking water sources away from them for our own development, especially in the fashion industry. So finding a way to come up with a product that met higher standards, that didn't use any glues in buttons, because of course we know where glue and gelatin, where that comes from, and tiny little day-to-day things, trying to make our impact as big as we could, with also making the negative impact as small as we could. I think that's been the biggest challenge. And the answer to that was finding a production center that was willing to work with us for a very long time to come up with a suitable product. So we really, for me, it just came down to doing a lot of research into product development and then finding really creative ways to get around that.
And of course, offering it at a very cheap price, right?
Actually, yes, as cheap as we can, because I think a lot of us are turned away from fashion that is, first of all, I think it's really hard to find fashion that is eco-friendly and vegan and ethical all at the same time. And if you do find it, a lot of it is message wear, which is wonderful. I love what that does for our cause. And it's really fun to play up that sort of side of our vegan personalities. But those aren't things that I can wear to work. Those aren't things that I can wear to the gym. Those aren't, what's the word I'm looking for? It's not...
Appropriate?
Yes, thank you. Yes, it's not an everyday appropriate thing. So in order for us to be able to get that out to the market, we do have to minimize how much profit we're taking in, which is pretty much none, because it's more important that we get the product out there for people who want to live the vegan lifestyle. So we are trying to make it as affordable as we can, because $200 for an American-made shirt is too much for the normal person. So yeah, thank you for bringing that up.
So you have a Patreon page?
Right. Working on that.
Awesome.
Thank you.
I would have to say some of the biggest challenges for us as a farm sanctuary are changing the perspective of how people see farmed animals, especially being in a rural agricultural community where we are, and trying to find support financially and volunteers and the things that come along with caring for the animals. Of course, it's financially, it's expensive taking care of farmed animals and providing for them the buildings and the pastures and the fencing and the vet care and the time that we spend taking care of them. But that just feels like part of it for us, that we're willing to give as much as we can, but trying to just gather support from the community. We live in in an agricultural area, so it's our neighborhood maybe isn't very vegan friendly. It's hard to change perspective of people and to bring in support for us. But the biggest challenge, or the hardest part, is turning away animals in need when we only have so much space and time and finances that we can put into it.
Sure.
Saying no is the hardest part. But luckily we coordinate with other sanctuaries, and we're always in contact with the sanctuaries that we know, saying, do you have space? Do you have space? Do you know somebody who could take this animal? And somehow, for the most part, it works out that we can work together and create a suitable situation for an animal in need. But I think for me, those are the biggest challenges. I'll pass it to you in case you can think of other.
The only other thing that I'd like to add to that, she'd mentioned most of it, but I also work outside of the home. I have a full-time job, and it's hard for me to find extra time in a week to come home and, mend fencing, cut firewood, build houses. So all the additional volunteer help is very helpful and handy, and look forward to it. And that's just a big challenge. I love doing the work, but I don't always have the time. So any other assistance that we get is always greatly appreciated, and it takes up a lot of her day and we're very busy at it. We love it. There's always more animals than there is farm sanctuaries, so we do what we can.
And how do people get in touch with you if they want to volunteer?
We have our website set up. We have cards. We have a booth out here, and
Your website is?
Soul Creations.
Soul Creations, okay.
Yeah.
I visited a farm sanctuary just this past week in Kentucky, and it was mainly a horse sanctuary. Kentucky, go figure. And the owner was so afraid of retribution from her neighbors, she had no signs. And the people who took us there said they weren't even sure really, they could try to remember how to get there because it was so off the beaten path. So living under those kinds of conditions must be really stressful.
And we haven't had any outward, conflict with any of our neighbors, but but there's the things that happen. We have our county fairs and our 4-H groups that are so strong in our area, and when we, openly are, don't participate in those things, it's kind of the undercover comments we get and things. So, well, we know who you are. Yeah.
Well, how do you then raise money to do this? Because it is very expensive to run a sanctuary and then not be too much in the public eye. So how do you do that?
We're fairly new. Before we became a sanctuary, we were a small alpaca farm. So, and being inside the agricultural community and being part of it is how we learned the truth about animal agriculture, and that is what prompted us to shift to a farm sanctuary. So we're mostly doing it on our own, and we're just starting now. That's why we're here today, to build community and build support and to find volunteers and sponsors. And so we're just starting to bring in a little bit, financial support and volunteers. So we're Facebook, social media, we're trying to get out there, and with our website and events like this and events on our farm.
Cool.
So, yeah.
All right, I'd just like to ask, because so many of us do wear clothing and shoes, how do we know if a product has glue in it that has come from an animal? I'm a runner, so I know there was a big effort a few years ago to get rid of any shoes that had overt animal product on it, like leather. And because the shoes are cheaper now, most of them don't even have leather. So that's not an issue, but
Right.
What about the glue? How do we know?
That is an excellent question, and the honest answer is that you don't. Really, you don't know if any heel that you wear is going to have glue on it, because it's not just nailing it in. They're gonna like you would a wood glue, but there's no way to know if that glue contains an animal product like gelatin. Yeah, I know. I know. We're all in the same boat, and I would say to you, don't feel bad. You do the best you can do until you can do better. And I think that's kind of all of our motto, and that's something to remember. So don't feel bad if you're wearing heels today.
But there are vegan shoe companies, right?
There are vegan shoe companies, absolutely. And a quick Google search will tell you what those are. And I would also urge you to reach out to the brands that you do love and write them an email and ask them about what they are using. And if you find out that what they are using is contaminated with an animal product or byproduct, write to them and tell them and say, we love your product, but we have a huge need. The more people that do, the more urgent it will be for them to make that shift, and the more animals ultimately that we can help. So really it just comes down to asking. You have to ask.
So if a shoe says like these do, all man-made materials, is that
Material
okay?
doesn't necessarily. Material is going to be your fabrics. It doesn't necessarily mean like a grommet that would be on a jean, or a nail in a heel is not necessarily a material. The regulations are pretty unregulated, just as everything else is, I think. So really, things can really slip under the crack with that kind of thing. But again, you really just have to reach out and ask. I would say that if you're wearing a sneaker, that's less likely to have a glue in it. A heel is more likely to have a glue in it. If it's a 2-part shoe or a 3-part shoe, that's more likely to have a glue.
Robert?
I just wanted to add a comment about, when we look at these kinds of things that are incredibly difficult to avoid, like glues and adhesives and construction materials, and all of these animal byproducts that are in our everyday lives, they're in asphalt, they're in streets, they're everywhere. But the fact is that these would not exist. These byproducts would not exist if it were not for slaughterhouses, if it were not for consumer demand for meat, dairy, and eggs. The fact is that they're cheap byproducts of slaughterhouses that would not be cheap byproducts if slaughterhouses didn't exist. These manufacturers would be forced to go elsewhere, and there are definitely synthetic alternatives in many cases. So it's important to keep that in mind, especially when we constantly hear people saying, well, you're never going to be able to avoid animal products in your life, and you're a hypocrite if you claim that, for example, I don't eat meat, dairy, and eggs, but then maybe I'm using a laptop or an iPad that has some kind of animal product in it. That doesn't make me a hypocrite. That just means that there is a marketplace for animal byproducts that I cannot avoid, because the slaughterhouse remains are so cheap that they make stuff out of it and profit even more, and sell them in all of these byproducts of things that we cannot control.
Yeah, you're right.
Great point.
So,
All right, how about we take some questions from the audience so we get your real concerns? Yes, ma'am.
Okay, well, I want to hear more about that book you have there up front. What is that about?
Looking around the audience to make sure we're all above 18. So the short story is, it's all about blood flow. And as I am preparing to put together my talk on this, basically I am just intending to start out, my perspective on it is, I was a 60...
We didn't all hear what the question was.
Oh, the question is, what is this book about? This is my latest book that just is coming out. It's been out on Kindle for 3 days, Vegan Sex. The short story is, I did not have the experience of having sex with a vegan until I was 62. And I was so blown away, and then joyous, and then angry. It's sort of like when you went vegan for the first time and you realize, why didn't my doctor tell me about this? I, without going into a lot of detail, just had a lot of relationships and marriages where ED, starting at the age of 28, was a given. And as the ED drugs came into being, that was part of the landscape, and it is for a lot of people. And in researching this, the research, the actual science behind it is, when you have blood flow going well to your heart, it goes well to all your other organs. And people are able to throw away their ED drugs once they go vegan, even at the age of 70. And it's pretty amazing what's out there. Joel Kahn, who is, he bills himself on Facebook as America's Healthy Cardiologist. He is my co-author, so he contributed the science and some of the research. The other part of this, that we also have 100 recipes in here that are using vegan aphrodisiacs, just in case you want a little extra boost or just fun. The other part I get into is the animal abuse in the $15 billion sex toy industry. And that just, it started off, I finished a 10K, and we were sitting in a restaurant, and this was in Punta Gorda, Florida, and this big van that was decorated in hot pink and just all kinds of things on the outside of it caught our attention, and I Googled it, and it turns out that the sex toy store was only 8 minutes away, so we ran over there in the name of research. I'd never been to one of these places, and again was blown away by the number of animal products, skins, leather, fur, feathers, and the things that they were selling. So, and just to give you an example, most condoms are not vegan. Who knew? They're coated with casein, which is a dairy byproduct. So there are vegan resources, and we have a vegan resources section of the book. So that's basically it. And I'm just really determined to tear down these vegan myths, and if we have more people who understood how this could reverse ED, I think we'd have, first of all, a lot more vegan guys, So perhaps it's a little bit personal here, but I'm also wondering how many relationships could have been saved, because it's not just about sex, but sex does often become this vicious downward spiral if you think, well, it's just not happening for me, and then self-esteem, you get blamed for things that maybe have nothing to do with the relationship but have everything to do with the physical way your body responds. So that's kind of it. Anybody else want to add to that experience? All right, yes, sir.
I'm curious, archaeology and its relation to a current optimal diet is still a matter of some controversy. All issues are not settled, but can you explain in a nutshell how paleo-vegan is anything but an oxymoron?
Well, one of the first reviews of, the question is, how can paleo and vegan coexist in the same sentence? And I'll just, how is it not an oxymoron? I'm a runner, and when I started hearing some of my running friends going paleo 6 or 7 years ago, I forced myself to read some of the paleo books, the meat-based paleo books, and I'm going like, this is Atkins, the South Beach, the Zone Diet, all over again, just cleaned up with a different label. And I started looking into it, and the paleo period, the whole paleo concept is, people ask me, what is that? It's how our ancestors supposedly ate between 10,000 years ago and 1 million to 2 million years ago. Given that there was no Instagram back then, we're only left to doing DNA examinations, carbon dating, that kind of thing, to figure out what was really going on. And I often joke that the meat eaters just made it to their publishers first. When I looked into the vegan interpretation of it, it was my belief that there couldn't have been a wild boar running through our backyard 3 times a day, and that we could have caught it successfully without getting sick and dying if we were able to cook it and eat it. And National Geographic came out with a cover story about a year after Paleo Vegan came out, basically saying the same thing. It was the cover story called The Real Paleo Diet. They called the current meat-based paleo books a stew of misconceptions. They said the success rate of current hunter-gatherer tribes, and there's only 2 left on the planet, is maybe once every month or so that they're able to catch something. So it's thought in true Paleolithic times, the success rate was even worse. And the most important thing they said, which really echoed my book, the world can't sustain a diet based around meat and dairy. And this idea that humane meat is something we should be eating, or that we can go out and catch these animals. I actually saw some of these websites, exoticanimals.com, where an ostrich egg you could buy for $80. Just to be on the paleo diet? I don't think so. And then if you go into a CrossFit gym, which is very correlated with paleo folks, you see canisters of whey protein. Really? 1 million years ago they were drinking whey protein?
Right.
Give me a break.
And there's dairy in the paleo diet.
Depending which book you read, right.
Yeah, there's oftentimes dairy added. Dairy is an invention, a fairly recent invention, so that's kind of hard to I don't know how they reconcile the consumption of dairy.
Well, it's kind of like some of the meat-based paleo books, the more popular ones, have the concept of a cheat, which allows you to cheat 20% of the time, because they understand a high-protein diet is not sustainable long-term, and most people don't follow it. So if you ask a meat-based paleo person what are they doing for the cheat, usually they'll giggle and say alcohol and ice cream. So when I wrote this book, I made sure I had a 20% cheat for those who wanted to do it, and for vegans, it's beans and grains. So I think that's a lot healthier than ice cream and alcohol. I mean, it's all about marketing.
Yeah.
And the science behind this has not changed. Some of the meat-based paleo books recommend ghee and tallow and lard. I mean, what cardiologist is signing on to that? It's about, as Dr. McDougall says, hearing good news about our bad habits, and that's really what this is. Anybody else want to chime in on that?
I also want to say that, there's also something about the paleo diet that I think appeals to a certain mindset in our culture, which is about a certain kind of way of looking at masculinity. And it definitely appeals to men more than women. And there's a very strong, powerful, symbolic connection between eating meat, eating the flesh of another animal, and that being a symbol of domination, of being able to control others. That's a very strong impulse and a very unfortunate part of our past, that we've had to do this to animals for thousands of years, when we now live in an age when we could easily, most of us could choose otherwise. So that paleo aspect of the paleo diet, as far as the marketing goes, there's a very strong connection between meat and masculinity, and studies that have shown you can market products as strange as you can market cars, aftershave, mouthwash, wallets, whatever it is, and associate it with meat, and you've got a winning strategy for selling product. So.
Yeah, the biggest craze right now is bone broth. And a woman I knew who was vegan at the National Senior Games, where I just competed and got third, by the way, in the U.S. in the 4x1 relays. She was now telling me that her personal trainer recommended bone broth. And I'm going like, where do you even start with this? But it really is tragic. And one of the things I did in the book was have a page where there are foods that are both vegan and paleo, 100% vegan. But for those who want to do the paleo diet, vegan style, I wanted to provide that option. And you ask, how can you do it again? It's time for vegans to reclaim and redefine the word paleo. What gives the meat eaters the right to say what it is? There's actually a lot of research now in the last just few years of different tribes in various places around the world where they have been able to find things like barley and oats, millet, things like that that are in the DNA and the dental plaque of their teeth. So it's whatever was in their immediate environment. And we were very much, as National Geographic says, way more gatherers than we were hunters. Yes, sir.
Could the panel please address two issues I had in mind? The first one is a merger of Ethical Treatment of Animals Association and Animal Rights Association, whose objectives are more or less similar, but the Ethical Rights Animals Association is concerned about how the animals are treated before slaughter and other things. Will a merger of the two promote the objectives of all the panelists who gave presentations today? And secondly, I am also a donor to Public Broadcasting Corporation, but we have 4 channels in Wisconsin. About 2 channels are devoted to cooking channels, and almost all of them talk about only meat preparations. And how can we, as citizens, at least have an influence on Public Broadcasting Corporation to get this conversation going in the mainstream?
Yeah.
And let's repeat the questions back because I want to make sure everybody heard them. Let's deal with the second one first. So in Wisconsin, as I understand it, you have a couple of cooking shows that deal and focus mostly on meat and dairy, and how can you change that? Good luck. That's a good question. We'll get into that more. The second question is, what are the panelists' opinions on how we view animal rights in, I guess, our specific agendas? Is that pretty much what you were trying to ask?
There are 2 associations, as I always hear about. One is the ethical treatment of animals. In other words,
Before they're slaughtered.
Secretly tape slaughterhouses and all, and they think the meat is not processed in a manner that's considered decent and with minimal hurt to the animals. On the other
You
side,
want to take that first? All right.
So I saw you in my presentation, and I just wanted to mention the one fiction or fictional device that we've used in many cultures around the world and for centuries and thousands of years actually is what I call consent, or what some other writers have referred to as sacrifice, which, animal sacrifice, which implies that the animal was willing to be commodified. So as soon as we started exploiting animals and bending them to our will to become a utility animal, then we started developing stories that would absolve our guilt, and they were peppered with this fiction that I call consent, that the animal was actually making a sacrifice for us. So to me, that's very important, because if we believe that animals are consensual, then it just boils down to how do we treat them. If we have society believing that animals are willing participants, then it's only an issue of how do we best treat them. And that's the problem with this with that kind of discussion, is that it assumes a belief in the fiction that animals want to be used as commodities, and that is absolutely false, I would say. I think it's easily to prove that they would much rather live a life according to their own interests,
Yeah.
just as we would.
And, the interesting thing now is there's so many videos on YouTube. I often say that the reason there are a lot of younger kids who are vegan is because they grew up in the YouTube generation. And these videos show the animals being, the calves being ripped away from their mothers and the wailing that goes on between them. And all of this is in front of us now. So the idea that there's any humane treatment before they're murdered is really kind of going out the window. And I think we're all kind of in agreement on that. And then the second part of the question, how do we defeat the meat and dairy industry and the media? Anybody?
Especially public broadcasting.
Yeah, I think
Yeah.
they're all equally guilty. but
I
go
think
right
we
there.
should use some of the same strategies that other nonprofits use, like, I don't know, like some campaign to get people to write the executives. Put pressure on these organizations, and we do need to work on an institutional level, not just communicating one-on-one with people, because we need to our activism to really influence institutions of that of that power, and tell them that ideas are changing, attitudes are changing, and it's no longer if you're going to show this kind of like one time I saw a fisherman showing his child how to club the fish after you catch the fish and club it to death, and that's the humane way. Are we just going to perpetuate these ancient modes of domination and attitudes of domination, or are we actually going to evolve as a species and realize that we don't need to give in to those base instincts that we have, that we can actually evolve beyond? And I think we need to work on an institutional level, do letter writing campaigns, do protests, do everything that all of the other grassroots activist organizations do well and get results. We can do it too.
We also we need to vote for more vegan politicians, or at least people who will understand this. The reason that chocolate milk cartons are handed to 5K finishers, every single 5K finisher, is because there is a Dairy Council campaign widely publicized on their website that's called Marketing Chocolate Milk as the Ideal Recovery Drink for Children. This is insidious. And if we don't elect politicians who understand that this is about the future of our next generation, we're going to continue this corporate greed as usual, and the influence of the meat and dairy industry is going to continue unless we find a way to shut it down. And the only way we can do it is to vote with our wallets, of course, but also be the instruments of change and really be willing to get out there and make it happen. Maybe it won't happen in this generation, but perhaps for the future. Yes?
I wonder, do you have a position on Senator Tammy Baldwin's Dairy Pride bill?
The question is, do we have a position or feelings about Tammy Baldwin's Dairy Pride bill? Take it away, panel.
I have a question about the farming sanctuary. I don't know much about that. I was just wondering, when the previous talk, he showed us what happened to the dairy cows and that they don't live very long. Do you get these cows when they're in their last stages of life? Do they recover? Do they live much longer? What do you do with these dairy cows? Do you know, like that?
We don't actually have cows at this point at our sanctuary, but I guess just speaking from our experience talking with other sanctuaries is they do get them, at their end stages of life, or oftentimes as young calves are the ones that are rescued from the dairy industry, maybe the male calves or sometimes the females who are at auction or who would be slaughtered, for veal or even raised as the dairy cows. So once they're brought in as calves, they can live out a long, healthy life at the sanctuaries. Cows can live to 20 years old, 25 years old. But in a dairy farm situation, oftentimes, they're repeatedly impregnated, and every year they're forced to become pregnant, and then as soon as they give birth, their baby is taken away from them, and the cycle starts over and over and over again. And by the time they're 4 or 5, their bodies are so worn out, then they're sent to slaughter. So I do believe, though, if those mother cows were brought into a sanctuary, even at the 4 or 5-year-old age, and given the chance to heal and recover, I think they could still live a long, healthy life without, ending it shortly like that. Yeah.
I just wanted to tell you too about a visit I had to a farm. It was an impromptu. I just stumbled upon this dairy farm on the side of a beautiful country road in California, and I just decided I was going to stop. And I was with Tom, and we pulled over, and he's like, "No, I don't want to stop here." I'm like, "I'm going to nose around a little bit." And the owner came out. He was a young man. He's had a dairy farm in his family for generations. And he was very receptive to me stopping. At first I thought, oh, maybe I'm, but he showed me all around. He wanted to answer every question I had. And it was a very standard operation, except for the fact that his products are marketed as grass-fed, pasture-raised, organic, and small family farm, okay? So what I found there, and I did not identify myself as someone who doesn't believe in how these animals are exploited at all. I just had a conversation with him. I asked him a lot of questions, and he answered them very honestly, I believe. And what I found there is basically all of the suffering that you see in larger scale farms on a smaller scale. In other words, the females are taken from their from their mothers, and they are put in these little plastic hutches. There's rows of them. Some of them their spirits are completely broken. It's the saddest thing you've ever seen. They're huddled in a corner, just like a little puppy who has been totally ignored and wants his mother's love, but instead is cowering in the corner of one of these plastic hutches. Others are incredibly having anxiety and running around the plastic hutch, crying out for their mothers. It was not a pretty sight. And the cows that are supposed to be on pasture, most of them are really not on pasture. They're actually in a holding area because they're about to be milked. If you're going to milk cows 4 times a day, or however many times they do, they have to be in an area that's easy to get them in and out of the milking parlors, which are hooked up machines to their udders. You can't have them out on pasture for hours and then try to drag them into the milking parlor. So my point is, all of these practices that he was doing, and he does his own what they call artificial insemination, or AI, which is a very invasive practice. All of this stuff is the same on these small farms. And the males, no, he never sees what happens to these calves that are either not marketable as milk producers, females that they know will not be producers, or the aging dairy cows that at 4 to 6 years old stop producing enough milk. It doesn't have to be that they stop producing, but they're just not productive enough to stay on the farm. They can't keep them on there. Or they're male. And they don't see where these cows go. They just call the guy that picks them up, and he comes with the truck and he takes them away. Job done. He never has to see any bloodshed, any violence, doesn't need to know what happens to them. So it's kind of like he's just living a part of the picture. And it looks like an okay part of it, but these cows were up to their ankles in feces and mud. They were not out on pasture enjoying, the hills. So.
How many of you have seen the video Dairy is Scary? Those of you who haven't, I would really recommend you look at it. Just a great 5-minute snippet of what is going on truly as everybody has been describing, but it's visual if you need it. The factory farm industry calls what was the word you used? Rape racks is what they use for the carousel or
Insemination.
yeah.
Their confinement.
Their confinement, however, the parlors, you call them. They're rape racks, that's what they call them. Anyway, In my visit to the farm sanctuary this week, they had a female cow and a calf who had been rejected by its mother, and at least that's the story they got. And the female, the mama, had been, who was there, who was not related to the calf, had been in deep depression because her calf had been stolen from her. And she wouldn't eat, she was ready to die, and both of these animals ended up at the same farm, and after a few days, the mama cow adopted the calf, so it became the surrogate breastfeeding mother. You know, as a Leche League leader, breastfeeding information and support group, what goes on in the dairy industry is just so horrific. I can't imagine a baby being ripped from my breast on day 1 of birth. And why would we think other mammals would have any less of a reaction? Maybe we don't totally understand their language, but we do understand the language of crying and wailing, and that's not something we should be doing.
They carry their babies for 9 months to have it stolen on day 1, which is
Insane.
insane. Anybody else?
Yeah.
Questions?
How about the red?
Yeah.
Oh, hi Kelsey. I didn't see you until now.
Yeah, I can't wait. Hello, everyone. Kelsey with Direct Action Everywhere. I was curious because this is something we face along the lines of obstacles. Do you ever face obstacles from fellow vegans and other animal rights, sympathizers? Because, we find as activists, we of course have the larger society to deal with, but also infighting within our own community can be a big problem too. So I want to hear about some experiences you may have had and how vegans or other animal rights sympathizers have also kind of hindered you from your goals.
I would love to, yeah. Personally, I have a conflict being a vegan and working with the animals and other vegan groups. Specifically speaking, we started as an alpaca farm before we converted into a vegan sanctuary. And through the alpacas and being in the midst of agriculture, we learned what it all meant and what was all involved, and that's what caused us to make the shift and become vegan. But because we have alpacas on our farm, alpacas are a fiber-producing animal and have been bred for thousands and thousands of years to produce unnatural amounts of fibers. So, for human use. So essentially, we have to shear our alpacas. And as an alpaca farm, of course, we marketed the product. Becoming vegan, that no longer felt acceptable to us. So, however, for the alpaca's well-being, they need to be sheared.
Right.
So we have piles and piles and piles and bags and bags and bags of alpaca fiber filling our basement. So I put the question out to the vegan community in many different groups. And I said, here's the situation. We have all of this fiber. Our alpacas, for their well-being, we need to shear them. They've been bred to produce all this fiber. So we can't just, say, okay, we're not going to do this anymore. They would die of heat stroke. So we have to shear them for their well-being. So would it be acceptable to us as vegans to, what we're thinking about doing is creating a fiber project where we only use the fiber from our own animals on our sanctuary, created product, and sold the product with like an awareness message attached to it, and use the profit from that only for the care of our animals. Thinking, what can we do with all this fiber and what would be appropriate as a vegan? And I would say the large percentage of the vegan community that I asked said, absolutely. If it's there to support the animals, we think you should go ahead with it. On the other hand, I've had other vegans saying, you can't use that product. That's exploiting the animals. And if you're using animal product, that you can't say you're a vegan sanctuary. I've had, asked other sanctuaries, and half of them, or more than half of them, said, oh my gosh, if you get this project up and running, we'll give you our fiber. We want to be part of it. That's fantastic. We don't know what to do with it either. And other ones said, if you're going to do that, do not even use the word vegan in your sanctuary.
Right.
So it's a challenge. And, we're kind of tippy-toeing in there, going, what's acceptable? And really what's acceptable for us, what do we feel comfortable with? And that is really a struggle for us. And I guess, other than that, animal welfare and the care of our animals, we, of course want to do our very best and give them the optimal care. But what that means to other people, it could be challenged, hasn't, but I know it has in other sanctuary cases. So we're always, cautious and careful and, hoping to do our best and, provide the best care for the animals. But I could see, I've heard stories of where that comes up with other sanctuaries. But, I would love feedback of, from other vegans what your opinion would be,
I just want to ask you, what do you feel would be the harm to you and your farm if you lost that label of vegan? If you changed your label somehow so that people understood the choice that some of these sanctuaries were making, like, would it be a really big hit to you to not use the term vegan so absolutely?
I don't think it would make a huge difference, except for to us, because we really want to advocate for a vegan lifestyle and, really help to move, get the movement going and move it forward and teach people, what it means to the animals and a lifestyle. So I don't know.
I think the question really, as I understand it, was really addressing some of the conflicts that we have. And if you have some ideas as to how it could be brainstormed, maybe afterwards you guys could have a conversation about that. Because it really does present some phenomenal, we could, instead of just getting into the one issue, we can maybe talk about some of the other issues that some of us have, if you do, in terms of, but, just the semantics alone in some of this can drive us all a little bit crazy. And I think it's really about sticking to the core principles of what you do. And some of this noise, this chatter that we hear that all of us get, the larger our movement gets, the more diverse opinions we're going to, and the word, defining the word vegan. Should we even be using the word vegan? Are we plant-based? I mean, just don't even start that one. But, there's so much room in our movement for all the different things that are going on. It's very exciting, I think, to see groups like DXE being out there and being the voice that maybe the rest of us wouldn't want to be associated with, or, but there is definitely room for all of these voices. So what about the rest of you? Do you have other conflicts like this that you've had to deal with?
I just want to say real briefly that the way I look at it is that, I've been involved in lots of other kinds of activism, grassroots activism aside from animal liberation and causes, such as, women's rights, disenfranchised groups, other human rights issues, environmental justice. And I don't see any reason why we should not benefit from the successes and the strategies that they are using. We are all animals. We are human animals, and all the other species are different species, but we all basically are advocating for not to be oppressed, and all of these other groups. Some of these groups do things exceptionally well and get really good results, and I think we should definitely incorporate that into what we do, and not and look at that as that's the reason we're doing it, not because we're having this infighting between groups that believe in this or that. Let's look at what others are doing and try to integrate our efforts with what they're doing. I think that would make a big difference.
Yes.
Kind of a question for Robert. When you went to see that farm and you spoke to that farmer, how do you not convey that rage that you feel? I mean, just like I have a really hard time talking to somebody whose politics are not like mine, and I just feel like they can see steam. How do you?
Well, sometimes I've not been as good as others, but on that particular occasion, I decided I wanted to learn as much as I could. I wanted to absorb as much of what his mindset was as I could. Even though I had heard a lot of what he said before, it wasn't the first time. But one of the things that was outrageous to me was the fact that he was bragging about the fact that he could now breed the heifers. And he was like, oh, I don't need to hire anybody now. I can do it myself. And, it's like you're just thinking to yourself, you could kind of just go crazy. But like I said, I wanted to kind of learn things from his perspective so I could retell the story from my perspective, but being true and honest to the facts I got from him. And so I felt like that was an effective way to tell a story about what we consider the best case scenario, and how, you know, yeah, he realizes that he doesn't deal with the violence. He realizes that, yeah, it kind of sucks to have these newborn calves not be with their mothers. He realizes all that, but he still does it because he's making a living off of it, and he's convinced himself that that's okay. And I just, I tried to just walk away with as much as I could, and it was, you don't walk away not feeling something and not wanting to say, but you know, that was kind of what I was thinking at the time. So I don't know, that's kind of a long and rambling response to that question.
Yeah,
But
if I may.
Yeah, jump in.
One of like little tips and tricks that I use when talking to people about the vegan diet and veganism in fashion, when people pose debates like that, is ask them questions instead of jumping right in with your opinion. Ask them, well, why do you think that grass-fed is better than, or what makes you think that USDA is trustworthy? And then when you make sorry, when you make them answer these questions, they kind of make that connection and realize, wait, why do I? Well, because the media told me so. Oh, well, why are you trusting the media to tell you this? Who's putting those commercials up? Who's paying for that? What is being subsidized? So I think just posing these questions back to them and making it a conversation instead of a debate really makes them kind of think inside themselves and make that connection of, oh yeah, you're right. Why do I think this? Because somebody told me so. Okay, well, you know, here's a great opportunity for you to do your research instead of just believing whatever is, you know, coming up when you turn on the TV or putting into Google.
Great points, and a perfect way to try and get people to come up with their own conclusions rather than shoving it down their throats or feeling like it's been shoved down their throats.
Right.
On the other hand, you know, there are groups that get out there with that message. You know, it's violence, not food. So sometimes it's just a short message that makes people think, perhaps, we hope. I know when Paleo Vegan came out, one of the first reviews on Amazon was, how dare you call yourself a vegan? And I'm going like, okay, I need to really develop that vegan thick skin. And you really have to do that because we're serving, hopefully, a higher good. The animals have no voice. And sometimes those of us who have experienced poor health don't even realize what track we're going down. So we have to be out there with our messages, whatever it is, whatever we choose, and just be strong and remember that the animals don't have time for us to figure it out. Why don't we take, I think it's right at 5 o'clock, maybe one last quick question, and then we'll call it a day. Anybody has one, or do we address everybody's? Yes, ma'am.
I was just curious about your opinion on, do you think that cell-grown meat will ever be a viable option?
The question is, will cell-grown meat ever become a viable option? We've had this discussion. I'm on the Florida Voices for Animals board. We put on the Tampa Veg Fest, and there is this real division. People want it to be anything that will prevent an animal from dying, and there are others who say, you know, we need to shut down the demand for animal products. That's just the way I see it. Any quick answers or responses?
I mean, I can give you my opinion.
Sure, go for it.
I think that there's a real demand for meat alternatives, especially for new vegans or people transitioning or looking for healthier alternatives that aren't ready to give up animal products. So I guess in my opinion, it's a better alternative than killing animals. So it may be a really viable product. I mean, it could really happen. You know, so I guess in that respect, it could be a real positive move. But it's still meat. And, you know, and I guess for me, just no. You know, but I could see where people need that in the transition, or, you know, and if we can get people to stop killing animals, I guess why not?
We need a new label for that.
Yes.
That group.
Yes, exactly. So, yeah, just my opinion.
All right, Robert, you look like you're fuming.
Oh, no, I'm not. I'm just thinking about a couple of other, I've written, there's some really thoughtful things that Casey Taft wrote a very thoughtful piece on this issue, that kind of not pro the lab-grown meat. And well, I'm more of the mind that, that's a consumer product and we live in a consumer society, and obviously the end result is changing behavior, but like from where I come from and the work that I do, it's really a focus on the beliefs that drive the behavior and taking a hard look at our beliefs and values and how those contribute to animal consumption. Because that's what I feel really needs to change before we can really see any major shift in behavior. So that doesn't really answer that question specifically, but.
All right, well, I think we need to close it off. Thank you, panelists, for being such amazing contributors and audience that you are.